he submits, gives the mugger everything. This person is going to be, the fruit of that, he is going to be forever afraid of dark places, going out at night, forever afraid of being mugged again. He's been scarred, and the fruit of that is fear.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you get these people that I have on our podcast all the time. I'm sure you do as well. People that you meet and they have this encounter with Christ, but the opposite happens. The fruit is they were fearful and timid. Now they're brave and courageous.
All right, guys. Hey, welcome to another episode of Mediocre Dads, where being mediocre is a choice. Where being mediocre is a choice. You never refuse to be mediocre every single day. I feel like I'm going to mess it up, and I overthink, and I do it every single time. Guys, it's my intro. I know I mess it up. It's all good.
Hey,
I'm your host. Go for it. Go for it.
Hey, welcome to Mediocre Dads. I'm your host, Q, and this is where Mediocre Dads shows how dads don't just have to be mediocre. They can be amazing. They can be outrageous. They can be anything that they want to be. And even if you are a mediocre dad, that doesn't exist. Dads are never mediocre. They are always above and beyond anything if they want to be.
Awesome. I love it. Look, y'all know who I am. You already got it. You heard him say it. That's my guest, Joel. Look, guys, it's going to be a phenomenal episode. I think I tell you all the time, every episode is a fun episode, but before I press record, what usually happens is I'm having the conversation with the person, right? Because, you don't want to just press record with a person you don't know. And I can tell you guys, legitimately, Joel's one of those guests that when the moment we got on, and I misrepresented him just a little bit. I said he was Australian. He was like, no, New Zealand. And I was like, okay. And he gave me a comparison. It's like, being from the States and someone saying like, oh, you're Canadian. Us in these States would be like, shame. Shame.
Game of
Me,
Thrones.
Canadian?
Shame.
Yes, exactly. Was it Xerxes working down the cobblestone? They're just like, shame. Yeah, exactly that. Look, so I apologize. I was taking a stab at it. I'm never gonna do it again. I'm just gonna be honest with you. I'm never gonna do it again. I'm gonna be like, hey, so where are you from? Okay, I'll be right in my head. I won't tell you what I was guessing. But anyway, guys, it's going to be a cool episode. But before we get too far into it, we were talking about Instagram. Guys, we were kind of talking beforehand. I wanted to press record and get into it real quick, but we were talking about Instagram. So when it comes to Instagram, I'll be honest with you, because you said something and it stuck in my head. You got to be like addicted to it. You're totally correct. And part of me that's the problem, is I am like addicted to like creating reels and like what's new for Instagram. And I hate it. I hate it because I don't like being an influencer. I don't want to be an influencer. I just want to be a podcaster. And so like when I want to be a podcaster, but you see all these podcasters following influencer style trends when it comes to their shorts for their podcast, you're like, okay, well, I want to be competitive. And so, you're kind of like posting it. And then it turns into, again, a game of posting, trying to get people's attention and clicks and all those things. And so honestly, Instagram is one of those things where I'm like, any social media truth is one of those things where I'm like, I don't enjoy having to do the chase, if you will. I really like to be able just to have conversations like this, and then hopefully people have people come more naturally, do some marketing, but not to the extent that Instagram or even like TikTok forces you to do. I don't have TikTok. I will not get TikTok. I refuse to get TikTok. But yeah, that's my spiel on Instagram. It's a love-hate thing. Honestly, if I didn't need it for this, I wouldn't have Instagram. I totally would not have it. I would just have Facebook. I would wholeheartedly just have Facebook. So, because I had a MySpace and then I switched to Facebook.
That's good, Q. I mean, one thing that I find is it's like taking on another responsibility, and the bigger your following grows, the more of an expectation you've got to maintain this persona online. So that sort of scares me a little bit, and I like it can become a job. It can become something that you're thinking, all right, I need to post, every single day I need to find something to post. And it's really good for growing your following, but it can become kind of something that now you start not really living in the moment. You're thinking, all right, what do I have to do next? I have to find something next. And
Yeah.
I don't like that, but I can see where it's needed. And as a podcaster like yourself, we have that. It's part of the gig. If you want people to stumble across your podcast, then you've got to wave a flag around. You've got to show that you're here, and that's basically creates that responsibility. It's just something I don't like, because all of a sudden there's an expectation to maintain it, and I struggle with that, because if I want to take a week off, I want to be able to take a week off, but it is what it is, and I'm okay with that. It's a responsibility that you step up to, very much like becoming a dad, right? Good segue.
Well, before we do the segue to the dad thing, I wanted to ask, because you have your own podcast, and it is the Jesus Magnet, and I'll be honest, one of the things that stood out to me the most was your podcast, and I was like, wow, this is I get to talk to a fellow believer, and to see a podcast especially with the name Jesus Magnet, it's right out in the front, like, hey, like, this is who I am, this is what I believe, this is what I represent. How did that come to fruition for you? Because we all have our own like stories of like how we started our podcast, why we started our podcast, what how we started to where we are now. But like, how did that happen for you?
That's a really good question. For me, I've always been fascinated with stories. You and I were talking at the start about Joe Rogan and how he's basically an excellent, not just storyteller, but somebody who can draw a story out of somebody. That's his job. He knows how to ask the right questions to sort of pull information out of people in the right way. And I had this friend of mine at high school, and his name's Levi, and he would be able to turn the most boring, mediocre story into the most interesting thing ever. He could just be talking about how he ate pancakes in the morning, but then he would say, man, when I was making these pancakes, I had this bird fly up to the window, and then the bird smashed into the window while I was making the pancakes, and then I ended up flipping them at the same time. But because I got the fright of my life, I ended up flipping the pancake right up into the ceiling. Now I had to wait for the pancake to unstick from the ceiling and catch it with my pan while checking that this bird is alive or dead. I'm not really sure. And like, he could turn the most weird scenario into the most interesting and captivating story, no matter what it was. And I liked that. And so basically our podcast is about captivating stories, and we have our niches as Christians. So we talk about how God captured somebody's heart. Once I was lost and now I was found. I was sick and now I'm healed. I was alone and then I encountered the living God, and now everything's different. So we sort of want to expand on that. How did that happen? And I do play the devil's advocate in a lot of the episodes, where I go, how do you know that was God? How do you know it wasn't just your mind? Because I think that's, that sort of stuff runs through my mind. I want to know, like, if I'm listening to somebody, I want to know that they're not deceived. I want to know that I'm not deceived, and I'm getting sort of just a cool story. It's very easy to do what Levi did and make a story bigger than it really was. But what I found is the more I talk to these people, the more real God has become. We've had these people that have like been resurrected from the dead. We've had major demonic manifestations with multiple witnesses. It's insane, the stuff that we see, that I have on the show. And I do play the devil's advocate, but I sort of, sometimes you just got to give up and be like, man, this really happened, and this was fascinating and amazing. So the podcast, how it got started, was my father had a really interesting testimony where he had this car accident when I was 7 years old, and he lost his eye, his brain damaged. His arm was de-sleeved, if you can understand what that might look like. He broke both of his legs and his back and his arm, and his neck was broken as well, and he was not supposed to survive. And he basically had this amazing miracle happen in his life, where he not only returned to work, where the doctor said, you're never going to work again. He returned to work to be an architect, and not only that, he took what the doctors said seriously, in the sense of you will never be able to work again. And he's thinking, I've got 3 sons. I've got 3 boys, little boys that I need to provide for. How do I work? How do I make money without working? That was his mindset, his thought process. So he learned how to invest really well and became a property investor and ended up, being very successful in that area. So I watched my dad from a time of not being able to, everything was lost. Most people in the world would give up and they would use that as an excuse. This is why my life is so bad. And nobody would blame him. It is what it is. You had this massive car accident, you can basically live off people being sorry for you for the rest of your life. And he rose above that and went, this is a bad hand that I've been dealt, but I'm going to keep going and I'm going to search for another way. It really inspired me, his story. And he talks a lot about God as well in his story and these incredible miracles. I mean, I've got my own testimony that's based around his story as well. And that's kind of what captivated me with the podcast, of how powerful people's testimonies are, because they were there. They were experiencing it firsthand. They're prime witness to what's just happened. And I find that stuff just so fascinating. Like with the Joe Rogan stuff, man, when you got somebody that's like, have you seen the one with Bob Lazar?
Yeah.
Where he's like working in Area 51 or something, and he's working with alien spaceships, and it's like pretty awesome.
Yeah.
To listen to that. I mean, take it with what you will, if you believe him or not. But at the end of the day, it's a wild testimony that he continually never refutes. He says it's real, it happened, and it's wild, man. But I love that. It's amazing, It's
Yeah. Well, I think that's super cool because, when we have our testimonies and it was like you said, you really got me in with your beginning of your story, or when you were talking about the podcast, talking to these people and playing the devil's advocate, right? Because when you're not a believer or you're on the fence, right? And someone tells you their testimony and you hear this testimony of just like, oh, I was demon possessed and, and no one, it couldn't help it. Then, one day I just felt God pulling at my heart, telling me, hey, you're going to be okay. Right. Whatever the case might be. And for those who are on the fence, for those who've never considered being a believer or know who this Jesus fella is, but never considered actually following him in that sense or becoming a disciple, it's like, that sounds far-fetched. That sounds far-fetched as Bill Lazar or the Lazar guy talking about working in Area 51 with all the aliens, but you believe in this Jesus character and I believe in these aliens, but you tell me I'm wrong and I think you're wrong. So like playing that devil's advocate is very informative to the audience and to the people that you're talking to, because what it also does is it doesn't force them to be like, well, let me prove to you that my story's right. What it ends up doing is them saying like, no, like, understand, I want you don't have to believe me, but this is my story. And this is what happened to me. And this is how I got to where I am. And it's the passion behind their words where you could tell like that if they're lying, they're good at acting. Right. You know what I mean? Cause like I can see the passion behind what your words and the passion behind how you've really felt how God impacted your life. It reminds me of if Paul didn't get blinded when he was on his way to Damascus as Saul, right? If Saul didn't get blinded by Jesus and then can't remember this gentleman's name, I always forget it, the one who came and the Lord told him, hey, go remove the scales off his Saul's eyes, right? If that didn't happen, think about would people really believe him, right? Because it was him, and I know there were others with him, and they were like, oh my, they didn't understand what was going on. But like, to think about, like, people believed him and said, oh, no, this really happened because look, the Lord sent me over to him, told me to put my hands over his eyes and wipe the scales from his eyes, and so he could see again. And that man could see, and then the moment he could see, he went to the synagogue, and he was preaching, and he was talking about Jesus. And you're like, listen, guys, you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of what I think about. It's like, because that his story in a lot of ways sounds ridiculous. Oh, you're on your way to Damascus and you, the guy who persecutes Jews and are Christians and all these things, you all of a sudden found Jesus. What have you been smoking the same thing that these Christians have been smoking? Like, what are you doing, man? Like, we just locked up some Christians the other day. Like, get out of it and let's go. You know, you just watched Stephen be stoned to death, and you believed it was justified. So, like, you know, get on with it and let's move on. So that's what I think about, and that's how I think how powerful it is. Like, gosh, like, no, like, it's testimonies are so important. But I you know, I love what you do, because I think it's really important to hear more people's testimonies, because in the Western culture, Western society, especially in the US, especially, we have this idea of Christianity and what belief is in persecution is. And for a lot of Christians over here, what persecution looks like is the people that I call friends. But yeah, right. You know, they offended me, or they betrayed me, or they did this thing, they wronged me. That's what persecution to them is, right? But then when you turn on the news and you said, well, you know, I think it was 70 Christians were killed in Syria. No, that's real persecution. That's what persecution is. That's what Jesus was talking about. And I think it was in Luke when it was talking about, hey, you have to pick up your cross and follow me daily. Like, that's what it was. And I don't think Christians over here really understand what that means. It's a really, God and Jesus and following him is more like a it feels good. Oh, it feels good, you know, and I'm going to follow him and whatever. And it is what it is, not realizing, like, no. If you went to North Korea and claimed to be a Christian, let me tell you right now, you'd be killed. The folks in North Korea who are Christians, they have most of the Bible memorized, because if they get caught with the Bible, they'll be killed, because they have to worship Kim Jong-un, right? Or you go to where a lot of these places, especially in Africa, where they're predominantly a Muslim beliefs, are Islam faith, and then you say, oh, you're a Christian, and they're like, well, you know, our goal here is that everyone will be, you know, under the Islam faith, worshiping Allah. So it's just the idea of persecution is foreign to us over here versus to the rest of the world. We're like, no, like, I live this. This is my faith. This is my life. It means everything to me. And so I think it's great to hear those stories. But for you, you know, your dad, you know, that happened to him. That accident happened to him. And then, you know, obviously being a young boy and seeing your dad go through these adversities, but also triumph over what seemed like an impossible situation to triumph through or get over. It's one, it builds this thing. And you're like, if my dad did it, there's nothing I can't do. Right. And, like, you know, my dad, he's amazing and I love him, but he has some shortcomings. And, like, you know, again, you mentioned it. Anybody in that situation would have understood, like, hey man, I get it if you just want to quit. You know, no shame in the game. We get it. Yeah, most people would.
I wouldn't blame them either. It would be more of an expectation, you know, like, oh, you've had a major car accident, you're in a wheelchair, and you never work again. Most people are going to be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's okay, you know.
Yeah,
they're
like, cool, man. Go sit down. Yeah,
he's just totally changed the game. Like, it was. I mean, I always think, who am I to quit?
Yeah.
Someone who has full functioning brain capacity that can, and my dad's like one of the worst asthmatics in New Zealand. He has an asthma attack every 4 hours if he doesn't take his medication.
Oh, wow.
That was before the car accident. You know, he didn't have a good hand to begin with.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that you're saying, I'll just go back to you're saying with how Paul and the scales coming off his eyes. I find it really interesting when I'm interviewing these people. They have these testimonies, and one thing that captures me is the fruit, what follows after this encounter. So for Paul, you've got this guy who, like you said, he murdered, kidnapped, crucified Christians. He was one of the ones that was approving Stephen's martyr when that happened. He was watching in approval. And it's so interesting that you see these disciples of Christ, they're going through, they're seeing Jesus do these miracles. They understand that he says, you know, I am the Son of God. They're aware with who he is. And then but these people, they're very timid and they're not brave. They're not courageous. But after Jesus dies and is resurrected, the fruit of their lives transforms. Now they become super courageous in the face of persecution. And at the end of the day, I wouldn't, if you knew something wasn't quite true, you might do one or two things for it, like if it was a cult or something like that. But to die for it means like that's a lot of commitment to convince 11 guys to die,
Yeah.
And what I find is the fruit, like looking at the fruit, let's reverse engineer this a little bit. Let's get somebody who has a terrible tragedy happens to them. They get mugged down an alleyway. And this mugging, the guy punches them in the face, breaks his legs, and holds a gun to his face and says, "Give me everything you've got." He submits, gives the mugger everything. This person is going to be, the fruit of that, he is going to be forever afraid of dark places, going out at night, forever afraid of being mugged again. He's been scarred, and the fruit of that is fear.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you get these people that I have on our podcast all the time. I'm sure you do as well. People that you meet and they have this encounter with Christ, but the opposite happens. The fruit is they were fearful and timid. Now they're brave and courageous. And it's like, what happened? Now,
Yeah.
how do you take out the fear? I mean, I understand how to install fear into somebody. You could really mess somebody up if you broke their legs and mugged them, and you could scar them for a long time. But to swap it around and to take the fear from somebody to turn into something courageous, that has to be a miracle. I don't know how that happened. Like, I understand how it happens one way, but not the other way. And that's where I know it has to be God. Like, it's time and time and time again that I see these insane things that happen to people where they have been mugged or they have been, raped or even murdered some. And then something happens and God comes and they're alive, they're healed, they're well, and they're courageous, and they're going, something happened, God happened, this is my story. And it's the same thing that happened to the disciples. They were these cowards that they said, are you a disciple of Christ? And he was a Peter. He said no 3 times, and it was like, this guy's one of his closest friends, and he's not even going to say that he knows the guy. He's a coward. And then after the resurrection, man, he is unstoppable.
Well, I think that's the power. That's the real power. I won't say real, but that's the amazing power of God and the impact that He has on our lives, because only He can change hearts. And it's kind of, I was thinking of Peter earlier too. By the way, I did find the guy's name. His name was Ananias. Ananias was the one who came to Saul. Sorry guys, that's what I was looking up because I wanted to get his name correct. But going back is think of Moses, right? When Moses was sent to go, hey, you're going to go, free the Israelites from Egypt, from Pharaoh and from slavery, right? From the Egyptians. When you read it, you read how Pharaoh said yes, and then his heart was hardened, right? And only God has that ability. Only God has that ability to change our hearts. And I think a lot of people take when they hear, they're like, oh, well, God says he wanted evil things to happen to Pharaoh. Like, no, he didn't want evil things. But things had already been ordained. Things had already been set to happen. He was showing his people like, hey, look, the chosen people, he was showing them like, hey, I have something in store for you. But if it happens on the first go, you're not going to give me credit. If it happens on the second go, you're not going to give me credit. So you think it go through seven different different things where they're like the water, the turns into blood, the locust, all those different things where without a shadow of doubt, they're like, oh, this is God. This is God. God is the one who's getting us through this, right? You know what I mean? Like that is like that just show you how powerful he is. But again, he changed hearts. He's the one who changes our hearts. The think of how Saul went to Paul and on his way to Damascus, and he encountered Jesus, and with a drop of a hat said, you know what? Yeah, once I can see again, not knowing he was going to be able to see again, went straight to the synagogue and started preaching and started talking about how Jesus is the one, Jesus is the way. That to me I was like, that right there. Everything I just said about in the beginning, where I was like, hey, all these people, I'm assuming here, it's not outlined in the Bible here, but I'm assuming there were people who were in Paul's life saying, hey man, like, remember when we were like, we were selling Stephen, and that was pretty cool, right? We got that guy, right? And like, this is what we wanted. This is what the Christians got. This is what the Christians deserve. And now he's like, no. Listen, look, Jesus is the way, the truth, the light. Like, imagine hearing that from him, and you're like, bro, what is wrong with you? But he really meant it. He felt it. And then to go to prison for Jesus, then to say, hey, I'm going to go to prison. It's going to happen. It's God's will. I'm going to happen. And he goes, I'm happy to take it on, because it means I get to do something for him and to bring him glory. And he was willing to do it. And that to me, where I was like, he's real. There's no, without a shadow of doubt in my mind, he's real. And it's such an amazing impact. Because like I said, only he can change our hearts, where we are just sitting there. We're just like, I'll tell you this. There's a guy who really betrayed me. And like that dude stabbed me in the back, and I was pissed, man. Like this is like relatively recent in my life. Like this was like October, November timeframe. And like, there are a lot of days where I kind of go back to the thinking where I just despise this dude. Right. But when it first happened, all definitions of like, I hate this dude. And now, when people talk to me, I'm like, you know what? I hope his family's good. I hope he's taken care of. His wife had a baby in November. I said, I hope he has a healthy baby. Again, I wasn't always saying those things, but I had to really, really seek God, seek his face, and say, Lord, how do you love your enemies? How do you love someone who went through so much just to make sure you felt every single thing about how they felt about you, how they hated you, they despised you. They thought nothing of the bottom of the barrel of you, right? But what changed me was thinking, I heard this thing where Jesus is coming in to Jerusalem on a donkey, and people are saying, Hosanna, Hosanna, laying down these colossal for me. Like, this is Jesus. This is the one. This is the Messiah. To only, I don't know how many weeks went by or whatever the case might be, to only change where then they're like, no, crucify him. Crucify. He is crucify that guy. Give us the murderer. We want him crucified. Right. And I think about that. Like, these people's minds had been changed like that, where they were like, Hosanna, Hosanna, to now they're like, yeah, no, really, yeah, you King of Jews, really show me. If you're really Jesus, you're really the Messiah, show us, prove it to us. And all those people hated him and were spit on him and stabbed him in the stomach with the spear, or the side with the spear, tore off his clothes, whipped him, beat him, all these things. And he was like, I'm doing this for all of them. Yeah. And I'll do, and this is for their sins, and I'm doing this. He told me, and I got to do. God, my Father told me how to do it. I'm going to do it. If he's willing to go through all of that, and that's 10 times worse than someone metaphorically stabbing me in the back and saying, "Hey, because they don't like me." And he loves. I came to him, and I was not a good. I wasn't a good person at the time, and he was like, "You're forgiven." The only thing I can do is forgive that person, even though my flesh says no, hate them. The only thing I can do is forgive him. He forgave me. And I'm not a good, I thought of every single wicked thing that I could do to this individual, where there was physical pain, mental pain. Yeah, I thought of every single thing that I wanted him to let him know, like, hey, you think it's a game? Okay, look, I can play this, but I play dirty. You go low, I go lower type thing. Like, I had in my head, like, Lord, you know what? You'll forgive me, don't worry. But now, Punisher style lifestyle, like, hey, for now, I'm about to go, take care of business, then I'll come back and we'll be good. But, no, yeah. I really, like, let's just show you how angry I was. But that realization of reading that, where it's like, but he forgave me. And the crazy part is, if I think about myself, about being there when Jesus was being crucified, who I would be, I'd probably be one of those people spitting at him, hitting him, and feel justified in doing so.
That's right. One of the interesting facts that I've come across with the crucifixion of Christ is studying Roman crucifixion, how it works. And basically, you'd get these Roman soldiers, and they would put somebody on a cross, and they'll break their legs to make sure that they suffocated at a certain point. And the reason they did this was because if a Roman soldier took a man off the cross, and they were still alive, the punishment for that is death for the Roman soldier for crucifixion. So the Roman soldiers they were really good at killing, and if they didn't kill, if the person on the cross was not dead, they would be joining them on the cross. So what's interesting is you get this group of Roman soldiers that would end up taking Jesus off the cross, and then all of a sudden, 3 days later, they're like, "Where's his body?" You know, freaking out.
Fear.
This guy's, what they're thinking, this will be the first thought, the guy was still alive somehow.
Yeah.
No, now I have to go on the cross. So
I can
that's their
only
first
imagine.
fear. And then the second fear is either he survived the crucifixion somehow and I have to get crucified myself, or he really did rise from the dead and I crucified God. Like, both scenarios are really bad.
Yeah. And your brain would probably break thinking about that. Like, just being like, did I crucify God, or was this guy really alive? Regardless,
Yeah, you're
death is
screwed.
the only option. Yeah, like, the guy, like, I am dying. I just don't know how, and I don't know by who, and I don't know when, and that
That's
scares
right.
me, right? That's, it's so interesting to think about, or when you think about that, is people, we read that. We can read that simple thing, right? Of just like, oh yeah, Jesus was crucified. Yeah, they put him on a cross. They always, the visual representation that most people have is that movie called, oh my gosh,
Passion of the Christ.
Passion of the Christ. There we go. Most people will have seen that movie and they'll be like, oh yeah, I got a visual representation that I necessarily didn't want, but I got it. I get it. Cool that Jesus got character died. But then people still don't believe, because I think it's easier to be like, but he was human, because got all that blood, and he's a man. He's just a man. You want me to believe that he raised? I don't know, man. I don't know. And it's funny because you mentioned Peter, right? Where he was with him from the beginning, right? And with him from the beginning, he saw him perform all these miracles, and he told him, he said, "Hey, man, look, this is supposed to happen. I'm going to get crucified, right?" And even when he's like, "Hey, I'm going to be crucified," and they're like, "Hey, don't you know him? Weren't you one of his disciples?" And he's like, how quickly he was like, "Nah,
No good, eh?
not me." And it's crazy because, like, you get, like, you just know Jesus is just sitting there, like, he can, like, he's Jesus. He can, I'm sure God can be like, is having him here and everything. He's just like, it's almost like imagine being in heaven, and God's like, "Hey man, hey Peter, look, I want to show you something." Presses rewind. I'm like, "Is this you? This is you, right? That's you? That's my boy. The guy who an hour ago cut off a dude's ear for me, but now, nah, I don't know him. Yeah, couldn't be me. I couldn't be one of his friends. How many did he say? 12? Oh, you might be missing one." I'm just, like,
We're all Peters, aren't we? Like,
yeah.
you're all zealous for God at the beginning, but when push comes to shove, is who are you? Are you the guy that cowers and goes, no, I don't know this guy, I don't know Christ? Or are you the guy after the resurrection of Christ, where you're courageous and bold, and you used to be fearful in front of crowds, and all of a sudden you can speak, and the Holy Spirit speaking through you, and it's something happened. Something definitely happened. It transformed them. And yeah, it's,
Well,
fruit shows, I think.
yeah. Well, and that's the amazing thing about, again, for me, and this is why I think Peter is such an amazing representation of your average Christian or your normal Christian, right? Is because if Jesus if Jesus' disciples didn't, if none of them had, like, they call, you have doubting Thomas, right? For example, right? If none of them showed human characteristics such as like things that we think, right? Or how we would think, or whatever the questions that we would ask. If none of them did that, and the Bible didn't depict that, and it was just like, okay, so you had this Jesus guy with 12 other perfect people that were following him, and not one point did they question, did they ever think like, hey, am I doing the right thing? Whatever the case, he said, follow me. And they're like, you know what? This guy's amazing. He said to follow him. So guess what I'm going to do? I'm about to follow this guy, And to really see and be able to read, like, Peter denied Jesus three times before the rooster crowed. Judas betrayed Jesus for money, right? Thomas was told by the other disciples, like, hey, no, Jesus resurrected. He's real. And he's like, I won't believe it until I can put my hands in the holes of his hands and his feet, in the hole in his side. And like, and it just shows the real humanness, a human side of these men, where you're like, oh, these were human men, where they're like, they doubted him even when they were with him. They even saw him and they still doubted him. But then Peter does this amazing thing where, when you start reading Acts, and Peter takes charge, and he's like, no. I did that once. I'm never doing that again. I denied the Father once. I'm never doing that again. And I know it's like that feeling of Jesus coming back. And when he asked him before he goes, he's finally seated right next to the Father. He goes, Peter, do you love me? And that feeling, that question, that weighing heavy down on Peter, where obviously the initial is like, oh, of course, Lord, I love you. But it's like, really? I think, I guys, not in the Bible, but Quan's personal, interjection here. I think part of Jesus is like, yeah, you do? Do I need to press rewind? Do we need to go back? Like, yes. My guy, remember? Do you not remember? But he says, do you love me? And I don't want to, he says, there's 3 different things that he says. And he says, anyway, I can't find, I'll have to look for it. But, he asks him 3 times. And in the end, he just essentially tells Peter, he goes, good, then go and make disciples, right? Go preach the good word to the people. And Peter, he obviously, you could tell he feels that. But he still goes, does it. He understands what it is. He understands what the Lord is telling him. He understands, like, you know what? Yes, I doubted him once. I'm never doing that again. But so many of us, we doubt him once, we doubt him twice, we doubt him 3 times, we doubt him 4 times, because we don't get what we want. He doesn't do what we want on our time. But yet he always comes through, and then we're like, oh, Jesus, you're so great. Oh man, yeah, I love you, Jesus. And we're just like Peter.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes we're praying and you're going, Lord, come through and open this door, and nothing happens right to the very last second. And a good friend of mine told me a quote that he kind of runs by, which is, God is never late, but he misses a lot of opportunities to come early, which I think is very true. He comes in his time, not our time. And one of my favorite stories with Peter is he's got some wild stuff in the Bible, but he is when you're reading it, and very early on with Jesus' ministry, Jesus approaches Peter and goes, hey, there's all these people that I'm teaching from the beach. Can I use your boat to float out so that I can kind of I can reach everybody with my voice a bit better? It's interesting reading that, and we know the story well, but we know it in advance. When you're looking at that story, and you've got Jesus he's asking to stand on a boat in the water, and you're going, hang on, isn't this the guy who does not need a boat to stand on water? He chooses to partner with Peter's boat and with Peter. He chooses that. He doesn't need him. He can stand there without a boat. Probably be a bit more effective too, because people will be like, yeah, this guy's definitely God. But it's interesting how, he doesn't walk on water until a little bit later on. But it's interesting because God is voluntarily choosing to partner with us in our lives. And once we get our minds around that the same way that you, Quan, want to partner with your children and what they're doing, you don't have to, but you want to. And how God is partnering with us as the good Father, partnering with us. And it's just, I love that part about God, how he doesn't need us, we need him, and our natural environment is to be with him. Like, that's the way it should be. Yeah. So good.
It's no, you're good. No, like again, this is why I say it's one of those things. I love the fact that I don't try to put myself in a box when I have these conversations, because you never know where the conversation is going to go. And truthfully, I love this conversation. And this is the crazy part about Mediocre Dads for me, truthfully, is Mediocre Dad started as, like, hey, I'm talking dad stuff, and I only can talk dad stuff, and whatever the case might be. And like, I can't deviate too much, because you have to have a niche. But then I remember last year I said, hey, I want to start like a Mediocre Dad's Bible study. And so I said, all right, cool. I'm going to do an episode by myself of just called the Bible study. And I did several episodes by myself, met this guy at the gym. His name's James Bogan. He's just Minister Bogan, but he goes by MB. And I had him on the episode or the podcast once. And this is in-person guest, right? Because I met him at the gym. Had him on the show one time. And right after that one time, we were like, hey, he's like, we can keep doing this. He goes, I love doing this. We can keep doing this. And we have not looked back ever since. So every Thursday, we do a live episode called the Bible study, and we just have we talk about different topics, different things, and whatever the case might be. But it's one of those things where the Lord has really changed my life to really put him at the forefront, where I'm like, man, like in the beginning, when I was doing Mediocre Dads, it wasn't to bring him glory. It was to bring me glory. I wanted people to look at me. But now I'm like, no. If it brings him glory for me to do the podcast, then he'll grow it. He'll build it, and he is the one who multiplies. And so kind of like when Jesus fed the 5,000, right? He multiplies. And so now like I said, like this conversation, like I love it, because it's like, hey, I don't put myself in a box anymore. I say, hey, like wherever the conversation goes, I love it and I enjoy it so much. If you guys are really interested in the story of Peter, I mean, it's obviously in the Bible. You can go through, but the one that I think you should really look into is when I was talking about when Jesus is asking Peter, "Do you love me?" This is John 21:16 through 19. So I encourage you to go read it, because again, it really. When you study the Bible and you start reading, when you read the Bible and you're like, okay, yeah, I get it. I get some parts here, Jesus born manger, got it, cool. Crucifixion, got it, cool. Next thing, Paul Damascus, got that, cool. Okay, what's the next thing? We got some letters here, got it. Paul jail, got it. Paul's dead, got it. What else do we got? Oh, okay, here we got some more of these things. James, that's Jesus' brother, cool, got it. It's cool. Revelations, here we go. Things get real here. And that's kind of like how we go through the Bible. And we're like, cool, read that, got it, I got the gist, be a good person in heaven, guaranteed, right? But when you really study when I was 16, that's what I thought. That's wholeheartedly, that's what I thought. I understood what it was to be a follower and read the Bible. And then when I heard people study the Bible, I'm like, why? I've read that thing, is something, do they have a special Bible where there's some hidden ink and they're like, this is what this means? But when I actually started reading the Bible, one of the things that always stood out to me was ears to hear and eyes to see. And when it was talked about in the Old Testament a lot, it was used a lot in the Old Testament, but then when Jesus used it, again, first moment I read it, started really reading and studying the Bible, it clicked. It was like, oh no, he's not talking about like, hey, your eyes, you're going to get new pair of eyes and you're going to be able to see things that other people can't see. No, he's talking about, hey, see how I see things here. and hear it, when you hear it, when it's written down and you hear it, you'll hear it how I want it to be heard and understood, and you'll see it how I see it, right? And that when I read that and I go, holy crap, that's what I understand why people are studying the Bible now. I like it, it kind of clicked, and we was like, oh, there's more to this. I was like, okay, what else did I miss because I simply just read over it, like I've just read over. Have you ever read the Bible, read something where you were like, yeah, I know I've read this before, the story of Jonah. Cool. I got that. I read it. And then you read it again. Sometime you're at a different place in your life, but you read it again and you're like, okay, am I reading a new Bible or something? Because I've read this story before, but I didn't catch this the first time.
Yeah. One of the, a little while ago now, I was reading through the story of Abraham and Isaac, and then stumbled across the point where Isaac is about to be sacrificed, and then God shows up and goes, no, you don't need to do that, and then God provides a lamb or a sheep or a goat or something that's caught in a thicket, and and then they sacrifice that instead of humans. And when you read that, I started looking into sort of what that means. Like it seems to be a random thing to be recorded. This animal stuck in a thicket, and then I'm realizing that this is sort of the Holy Spirit's going, there's more to this. This is a foreshadow of Jesus, and the animal stuck in this thicket is like, if you look at what that is, it's a very thorny bush, and it's the crown of thorns around Jesus, and God providing the sacrifice, this is now Jesus that shows up, and this is the thing that gets sacrificed instead, in place of Isaac, which represents mankind. And then I start looking into the mountain, and it's the same mountain that Jesus gets sacrificed on, and I'm like, my gosh, like the deepness.
Hold on, really? Is it really?
Yeah.
I didn't know. Oh my God. Oh.
And then it gets even more crazy when you start looking at Genesis, and you've got God talking to Satan saying, you're going to bite my heel, but I'm going to crush your head with my heel, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got this cross that goes into this hill, this mountainside, and it's pushed in. It's called, the mountain is called Place of the Skull. So it's legitimately a cross, something crushing a skull. That's Jesus on the cross. He says, I'm going to crush your skull. You might bite my heel, but I'm going to crush your skull. And it's the same representation right from Genesis all the way to Jesus. And it's mad. Like when you start looking into that sort of stuff, it all sort of cross-references each other. And then you're going, all right, well, even though they're 1,500 years apart, all of this text, and they all relate, like it relates so much to itself. It's just crazy. So that was one of the things when I've read the Bible, and then I was going to a Bible study, and they sort of like expanded that a little bit more because I had some questions. I was saying, like, this is a random story, and I'm friends with a whole bunch of Youth with a Mission people. Mm-hmm. And this one girl, Rose, who's amazing, she's like a Bible scholar, basically. And she expanded all that for me, and I was like, oh my gosh, has this always been in the Bible? Is the Bible always this deep? Like, I don't know what to read next and be like, all right, do I need to cross-reference every single word to see if it shows
it's
up
crazy. I think that, like, that's where I had gotten to at one point where I was like, I need to go back here because I was like, maybe I'm missing something, but it was just like this thing where you're like, okay, there's a connection to this. This is connected. Like, okay, what I reading Isaiah, and Isaiah is where you really start to hear and understand the foreshadowing of Jesus's arrival, right? Mm-hmm. And you're like, how did he know that? Okay, crucifixion. So like, And I don't know if this is for a fact. It's one of the things that I've heard. Again, I would have to do some research, but I heard it, and I feel comfortable saying it here. I'll look it up, and you guys can tell me if I'm wrong in the comments, whatever. But his crucifixion wasn't actually a thing at the time of Isaiah, right? But Isaiah mentions him being on a tree, right? Being hung on a tree, right? It doesn't get any that closer to that, right? Like, how do you know? How does that happen? How does he just be like, hey, man, look, I'm guessing a tree, man on a tree. They'll figure out the rest. He's got it. Look, they'll make them make sense for y'all later down the line, to where you're like, he was crucified on a tree. How did he know? How did he know that? Obviously, God would speak to it. But like, again, these are the things. This is the thing where you're reading and you're just like, holy crap. Okay, this. He was telling them that Jesus was coming.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, this Messiah character, he'll be here at one point. Maybe we'll see him. Maybe he's already passed, but this Messiah character. And I just, again, it's amazing to me. The Bible, and when you read it and the correlation, it's just so amazing to me.
It's interesting seeing like Old Testament stuff come and the prophecy fulfilled in the New Testament. Gets really scary reading the New Testament stuff and going, that hasn't happened yet. So we get to see that. And one thing that comes to mind, which freaks me out a little bit, is when you're reading the Revelation of John, the last book. And there's one part in there that says that the sky recedes like a scroll. And I think of an atom bomb, a mushroom cloud. And it's like, if you have never seen what that looks like and you're describing the sky receding like a scroll, it's the same as the mushroom cloud coming around.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, geez.
You're like, I don't know if I want to be alive when that happens. And and I say that jokingly, but like serious, in all seriousness, like it's a sombering thought that when I think most people know this verse now, but because of the church, but Matthew 28:19, right? And if if people on social media, they know the church 28:19, Philip Anthony Mitchell, phenomenal pastor. That dude is a beast. And talk about a teacher. That dude's a teacher. He knows how to break down the Bible really well and explain it and be able to pull things together and then be able to bring Old Testament to New Testament to be like,
is he a friend of yours?
No, he's not a friend. I wish. I wish. No, he's a pastor. He's a lead pastor at a church called 2819. I know you're not on Instagram. He's really big on Instagram. I think on TikTok as well. But he's this bald black dude. He's always in black. And he explains a lot of this if you listen to some of his stuff when he's on other people's podcasts and he's kind of doing what he's doing. He's a guy that he's one of the pastors where he is really on fire for God. And I love listening to him, and I love listening to him, how he breaks down the word, because I learn something new every single time. And I'm like, gosh, I didn't know. Gosh, I'm learning. And you could just, again, it's like that you hear the passion behind what he's saying. He named his church. He renamed their church because he had a church but they renamed it to 2819. And he renamed. And when I first heard of it, I was like, why is it called 2819? Didn't know it. And I remember one time listening to one of his sermons. And he goes, for those who don't know what 2819 is, he goes, it references Matthew 28:19. Now go and make disciples of men, baptizing in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And I'm like, wait, what? Hold on, where is this at? I have two Bibles. And one's New Living Translation, the other one's the ESV. But I have it highlighted in both of my Bibles. And where you're like, when you read that, you're like, that was Jesus's last commission for us. He said, go and I love it so much. He goes, go and make disciples of men, baptizing in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. That is what he told us to do. That is what we all are to do. Not just like, hey, I work in the church and I can go do it. No. All of us are to do that. Hold on, let me see if I can actually you get here to Matthew. I love this verse because again, it's just one of those things where. Sorry, I'm doing it with one hand, so it's kind of difficult when my Bible, because I flip past it and I get mad. Ephesians, no, John, there you go. Or Matthew, there it is. 28:19. But like he has, like I said, he truthfully, like when I listen, if I'm like on the road and I'm listening to a podcast, or if I want to, really want to listen to something, I'll turn him on because I'm like, this is a pastor that I feel when I'm listening to the power, the true, what's the word I'm looking for? The emphasis behind the words, just, you could just tell he's passionate, the care, the real genuine, like, hey, like, no, I'm not doing this because I want you guys to come and look at me as this amazing guy. No, I want you to seek Jesus just as much as I have sought Jesus, and to see and to feel his, the yoke that he talks about, the lighter yoke that he can give us, of really just give us. That's what he wants us to experience. But it is Matthew 28:19, where he says, they go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And even verse 20, he says, teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I have given you, and be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. And that's the final thing that Jesus said, to go do. And what it's all about. That's what it's, at the end of the day, it's what it's about: going out, talking to people, and just being able to tell them about the power, the amazing love that Jesus has for us, and him, what that means of him dying on the cross for our sins, and how we can live a life that is not, we're not to ourselves, right? We're just, it's angry, it's bitterness, it's pride, it's sadness, depression. It's, don't get me wrong, you're going to go, Jesus said this, what they did to him, we're going to experience worse, they're going to do worse too. But once you have them in your heart for real, it doesn't even matter. And that's what you were talking about when you said earlier on, when you're talking to people, you understand the reaction of, I understand why you would be fearful, but I don't understand why you're not afraid. And you're like, no, look, I got Jesus. I can do anything.
Scare away. Yeah. That's a weird thing to happen in any situation, whether it's Jesus or something else, that is worth exploring, I think. So, like, many people rule out exploring it just because you say the Jesus word. They're like, oh, can't be right. But you should explore that, because that's a weird thing to have happened. If you were once fearful and now you're bold and courageous, you were once sick and now you're healed, you were once dead and now you're alive, whatever it is, you should, whether it's Jesus or not, you should follow the logic where it leads. I believe it will lead to Christ, but don't rule it out just because somebody says it's Jesus. That's being closed-minded. It's interesting that you're talking about the Matthew 28. What's your thoughts on, if you've got your Bible handy, I think it's Matthew 27, verse 52, and it's the only gospel that has a mass resurrection. Like, not just Jesus resurrected.
Okay. Also, I said, and tombs opened, the bodies of many godly men and women who had died were raised from the dead. They were left at the cemetery after Jesus' resurrection, went into the holy city of Jerusalem, appeared to many people.
How crazy is that?
And so, gosh, again, one of those things, I read past it, like, no big deal. I'm just trying to get to the end of Matthew at this point, right? Because I'm so close. But then to reread it, I was like, no, I did read that before. And I did remember having a question. So, quick tangent. I have 3 highlighters when I highlight my Bible. The pink one is for key, very important information that I always want to remember. The orange one is for, like, hey, I have questions. I need to know more. I need to do some more research in this. And the blue serves as like, hey, this is important, but it's not the main thing. It's not like, when you read John 3:16, we know John 3:16, but what was said before that and then after that to add value to what makes John 3:16 such an amazing verse, right? So that's what my blue highlighter is for. So in this case, this would definitely be an orange highlighter, because my question would be, and as you mentioned, Matthew's the only one who mentions it, right? And then, but he talks about how, and here's the thing, I can read this and be like, hey, cool, some people were raised from the dead, and they went up to heaven, cool. But the fact that it says, and they went into the holy city of Jerusalem and appeared to many people. Okay, so, all right, there are people.
Zombies.
Yeah, there are people out there
Zombie
who
apocalypse. It's in the Bible.
Yeah, but like for real, there are people out there who are like, Jesus, that whole thing that didn't happen. People at that time. So like, I want to know, who are these people that they appear to, and did they like speak up? Did they be like, no, this Jesus character is real? Also, the people who came back and they appeared to these people, was it, hey, I get to see you one last time, or was it like, hey, listen, I get to see you one last time, but I got something to tell you. That Jesus guy, he was for real, and you need to follow him. Listen, you want to see me, follow the Jesus guy. Do anything and everything his disciples tell you, and how to live a life that's above reproach. But go ahead, that's what you need to do. I love you. I'll see you one day, but you need to follow the Jesus guy. That's what you need to do, right? Like I wonder, was that the conversation, right? Because, well, like exactly, but like that's the crazy part when you read that and you're like, okay, but there are still people who don't believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Like the disciples went around and said, hey guys, Jesus rose from the dead. Like we saw him, and many people saw him because Jesus was walking around or roaming around the earth for 40 days before he was seated at the right hand of the Father. 40 days. He didn't spend all 40 days with the disciples. So like, we get some look into where he was, who he was with, but we don't have an account for every single day where he was and who he was with. So,
yeah,
he was doing something. Like he's Jesus. You know what I mean? Like he was doing something, and he was resurrected, and he's been 40 days. 40 days. What was he doing for 40 days? And this is a question that the Bible doesn't answer. We don't have the answer to right now, and that's okay. It's not one of those things that we need. Once we get the answer, it's going to really shift our faith to a whole new thing, right? If it was meant to do it, it would be in the Bible. But I think at the one point, we might get that answer where we'll be like, Jesus was out here talking. Oh, he was over here. He was doing, well, oh, wait, hold on. Like where things start to make sense, start to click. I don't know the answer to this. I don't know why Matthew's the only one to talk about this. And like,
it's just
Matthew,
awesome.
yeah, but Matthew's such an interesting guy too. Like, of once you understand like who Matthew was, right? He's not one of the 12. He's a physician with the disciples, but he was there throughout the whole thing.
Wasn't Matthew the tax collector?
Matthew was who was the physician? Luke was the physician. I'm sorry. Forgive me. I'm sorry. Luke was the physician. Matthew was the tax collector. But again, these random people that okay, we know who the disciples are. All right. We know who the 12 are. But like the main books of the gospel are not written by all 12 of the 12, right? Obviously, Judas, sorry, you don't get one, my friend. You got, we all know Judas. Really? Was it worth it, my guy? Anyway.
Yeah. It was prophesied, which is
it had to happen.
Yeah.
Wasn't
his choice. I don't know.
Well, we all have free will. So I do believe we have free will. And I think, yes, it was his choice. And I think he chose to do that. But I think, obviously, in the end, he regretted that. He gave the money back. And they're like, yeah, we can't. And the Pharisees like, no, we can't take that back. That's blood money, guy. So we're not going to give that back. We're actually going to give you a plot of land, I guess, if you want to give the money back, which is prophesied in the Bible, in the Old Testament, about the person who would end up betraying Jesus. But I think in the end, there's a lot of questions. There are a lot of questions, right? Like, I don't want people to think that as believers, we just read it and we're just like, I have a question, but because I can't get an answer, well, I guess I'm still I'm just gonna believe because it is what it is, and I don't have any questions, because if I have questions, I'm questioning my faith. No, it's Jesus. God encourages us to seek knowledge. He wants us to seek knowledge, but he also tells us that we're not, there are questions that are not available to us, and they won't be available to us in this life. And it's one of those things I'm like, I can accept that, right? One of the biggest things that I try to tell people, because they bring it up to me all the time, is flat earth. I'm like, hey man, look, I don't know.
Flat Earth,
I have
really?
really, like, for real. I'm like, I don't know, you guys, people talk about the what is the firmament, right? And I'm like,
Yeah,
I can read that. And, I guess if that's the conclusion that you get to when you read that, sure.
These guys on your podcast?
No, I've never gotten a flat earther on my podcast. Look, I'll be honest with you. I want to.
Send them my way. Please send them my way if you do. I got a lot of questions.
Well, again, I do have a lot of questions for a lot of people who would say, hey, the earth is flat. So I'm like, all right, man, this is going to be an interview. This is not a conversation. This is an interview, because I got questions. You need to answer them. And we're just going to keep going until I can show you that you're wrong. But again, is the earth flat? I don't know. I've never been to space. And, it'd be one heck of a thing to sit up there and be like, so
I
you
think
were
it's
right.
funny, like, maybe it is. And it's like, well, who cares? Like, it doesn't change anything.
100%. And that's truthfully, that's my point. It's like, it doesn't change whether or not I was going to follow Christ. It doesn't change how I was going to follow Christ. Right. Also, it doesn't change my life to know, to be able to be like, there's flat in the versus the spherical shape, whatever. It doesn't.
I think
I don't care.
The most interesting part about the flat Earth is not necessarily the biblical stuff. I think that's interesting how they've interpreted Scripture, but also how their reason for the cover up is the government just doesn't want us to know. I don't understand that logic. Like, there's a lot of people in the government, for one. Yep. Somebody's got to let it slip for sure. But why? What's the benefit of them hiding the shape of our planet?
That's the thing where it's like, guys, if they're hiding the shape of the planet because really there's this alien galactic war that's been going on outside of our firmament, if you will, for thousands of years, and we the people on Earth just can't really handle the truth. Select few are out there helping the aliens do what they need to do, and that's what they need to do. Yeah, and that's just what it is. Man, that's one heck of a story. It's one heck of a cover up. And I'm not gonna lie to you. Who cares? Again, it's
true.
Like,
true. I don't really care.
If they're true, if there's people out there fighting this galactic war we don't know about, guess what I got to do tomorrow? I got to wake up. I got to go to work, and I got to live my life. I got to pay bills. So the aliens not paying my bills, so I don't care.
It will just raise some questions regarding more physics, like how it's possible. That would be something that would be like, all right, if it is true, how is this actually physically possible? Like the way that gravity works, it pulls everything into a center, which makes sense that planets become ball shape.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
and again, those are the questions where you ask, and like, well, let me tell you, the government. Hold on, okay, the government can't control gravity. If the government can control gravity, I'm telling you right now, we would know. I'm just gonna be honest, we would know, and we would know because they'd be using it to their advantage, right? Mm. And so, I think that, in the end of the day, again, I think people like to believe that there's something else, that there has to be another explanation, and people are just hiding the truth. And don't get me wrong, governments lie. Fully aware governments lie. CIA lied about JFK assassination for years, which was like, hey guy, after the first 5 years, the American was like, it was the CIA. And everyone was like, no, it wasn't. We didn't do that. We got it. Okay, we won't say it. It wasn't the CIA. I get. Okay, cool. We all know. We all get it. It was you guys. Anyway, that being said, right, it's one of those things where you can't hide it. You're not going to be able to hide it for forever. And I think that's the reality of the truth. And I think people seek these ideas of grandeur of like, oh well, this has to be the truth, and this has to be the truth, and it's like, or is that just your heart trying to seek for a bigger meaning, and where the bigger meaning was always God, it's our hearts are hardened because we're, like, hey, that God fella doesn't answer all of my questions, so now I'm not going to believe in him. Science tells me, and my research tells me that this is real. This government secret thing is going on, and it's like, it's like, no, man, I think it's your mind, it's your body, it's your heart trying to seek a meaning and understanding that only God can give.
Yeah. I mean, I've kind of come to the conclusion from, like, I watch a lot of Joe Rogan, and I like the Ancient Alien series on Netflix, and like we mentioned Bob Lazar earlier, and how he says he has in the past worked with the government with this extraterrestrial vehicles, and they've got anti-gravity machines and things like that. What I think, I mean, I'm open to changing my mind, but I actually think that this sort of stuff actually fits in with Christianity more than most Christians realize. If you look at the Bible where it talks about, can't remember who it is, you might be able to help me out, Q, where there's a guy who sees this vehicle in the sky, and it's got wheels upon wheels, and they're spinning, and it travels in all different directions, and it's got this really weird description. Basically, when you read that, it's like, that basically sounds like a UFO, you know? And then you've got like the Tower of Babel when that was built, and that you've got these, basically, even God himself says, because they can all communicate with each other, they will, if they put their minds to it, they can achieve anything. And talking about, they're basically trying to build a tower that's high enough to get to heaven. And if you look at that, and you think of, like, maybe it wasn't a tower high enough to get into heaven, but more or less something to be able to break into heaven, like a portal. And then God actually confuses the languages and moves people around the planet. That's where the Tower of Babel comes from. Babylon, nobody could understand each other. They would just babble to each other because they're all speaking different languages now. And that's where the origin of languages come from. Through that story. And it's interesting how then there's, in Samuel, you've got this the king finds a medium to be able to raise Samuel from the dead and actually talk to Samuel, and it is Samuel himself who gets raised from the dead. Like, that's in the Bible. There is necromancy in the Bible. And it is drawn from somebody that's a medium. It's in 2 Samuel. And it's interesting when you read stuff like that and you're going, okay, witchcraft is in the Bible, confirmed. UFOs in the Bible, potentially, you know. And then you're going, okay, there's this technology in the Bible that could be extra dimensional to be able to break into the heavenly places, because we all believe that the heavenly places exist. And then you've got Jacob's ladder, where he sees these angels going up and down from heaven. And you're thinking, all right, this is, I mean, think of that like an abduction, you know? Sucked into heaven. So this sort of stuff can happen. Were we able to tap into this at some point? Could demons show us this technology, or angels show us this technology to be able to do this sort of stuff? And then the next thing comes up, that there's that guy, I can't remember his name, who was the whistleblower for these alien, he doesn't call them alien spaceships, he calls them non-human pilots that they were recovered inside these spaceships and something like that. It was in like a big courtroom in America where this whistleblower comes out. I can't remember his name at this time, but it's interesting how he doesn't say extraterrestrial. He just says non-human. If I was a demon wanting to deceive humans, I don't have to convince you that demons are real. I just have to convince you that aliens might be real. And what might look like an alien might just be a demon. this is exactly what I believe. Just for your listeners, I'm very open to changing. I've changed my mind like 17 times when it comes to predestination or free will, or I'm very open book with letting the Lord shape my theology as I continually learn. But this sort of stuff. If people have seen UFOs and all this sort of stuff, I'm not saying aliens are real, but they could look real. And a friend of mine, he's a theologian, and he studied the occult Bible. And one of the Bible, he was telling me the other day that it says in their scripture that when I take the believers in Jesus, when they're taken, we're going to say that they were taken for your benefit, like an alien abduction. And so basically it's showing that the rapture is going to happen, but this occult Bible already has a reason to deceive everybody on the planet when it does happen, that we're going to say it was something else. And it's just crazy, like when you start looking into this sort of stuff. I don't think there's an alien spaceship that shows up. Basically what I'm saying, if an alien spaceship shows up, it doesn't disprove God in my books at all. I'm not saying that just because something else might appear to be real doesn't mean it cancels out my faith. My faith is so grounded, but I think that these components are actually there a little bit. Yeah, I never talk about the stuff on my podcast.
No, that's awesome. Well, this is what I was looking for, and I haven't found it, but there's a part in Revelations where
I won't be offended if you edit all of that rant out, by the way.
Oh, I won't be. Look, this is going in, like, this is important because people, like, this like, again, I think a lot of people believe, Christians are very simple-minded and one-track minded. And again, as I said earlier, as if we don't have our own questions, right? But like, we're not, as a believer, God doesn't want you not asking questions. The thing is, it's not our focus as believers. That's not the priority as believers. Again, I have questions. Is there potential for these, what we believe aliens or whatever, to be real? Are they real? Or do they exist? Did they ever exist? Like, again, to mention the Tower of Babel, like, was it a literal tower or was there other things? Like, sure, I have these questions, but it's not the focus. And I'm not saying it's yours, but it's not my focus to the point where I miss what the whole point of following Jesus and being a follower is about.
I agree. The gospel is simple and clear. This is extra stuff. If you want to go into it, you can go into it. Like, the earth is flat, the earth is triangle, the earth is round. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't change the gospel.
Yeah, exactly.
But I agree with that. Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of people, when you start talking about it, even Christians will be like, well, you how dare you talk about these things as if they're real? And I'm like, hold on, man. Like, we can ask questions. Okay. Like, think of the story of Job, and think of the friends that Job's sitting around the fire with as he's freaking basically peeling off his skin right at this point. And his friends are like sitting there talking to him like, hey, you must have sinned against God. This is why you're in the predicament that you're in, right? But Job is asking questions and seeking understanding for his suffering. And his friends are just like, shame on you. You're questioning God. And at no point does Job actually ever question God, right? He asks questions that us as people who can experience pain, physical pain, anguish and all those things, especially with Job for experiencing what he was experiencing at that point. He asked the questions that most of us have already asked in our head, or maybe just too afraid to ask out loud. And I think that's where people get so wrapped up in them, like, hey, hold on. Job had questions. And then God saw him. In the end, God came to him and said, hey, man, what do you want to know? Who are you but mere man to question questioned me where it was like, oh God, hey, you revealed yourself to me. You considered me worthy enough by by your time, being worthy enough to appear to me, to speak to me. I'm not, no, I have zero questions. You look, your will be done. Whatever it is you want to happen. And then he blessed Job he multiplied everything that Job had had. And again, I use that as a reference to say, hey, Job had questions. His human friends ridiculed him as if they could speak for God, as if they were the prophets and people who are connected with God themselves, to say, this is what God's telling you. You sinned against him. This is why he took you. Whatever you're hiding, you need to come out and tell us what your sin is. And then we can hopefully, God will see, your repentance. And then, just maybe you won't get your stuff back. You won't get all your life you had back, but hey, at least you repented in front of us, and we can determine whether or not your sin is worthy of repentance or not. And I think that's really what what it comes down to. What they were doing was trying to get him to acknowledge, hey, you sinned against God. Tell us what your secret sin is, because obviously God found it to be a wicked sin. So tell us what it is. So one, we could judge you for it, but two, we know what to avoid, because we don't want to end up like you did. But again, throughout Job, he's asking questions. Job's asking questions, and he's like, who are you to speak for God? But why does this happen? How does this happen? He's asking the questions that all of us as humans, we've asked these questions ourselves before. People ask God all the time, why do miserable things happen? Why does my friend he has 3 beautiful kids, but his son one day can't breathe, gets taken to the hospital, and he's no longer here. 3-year-old son. We've all had, we sat there, you can sit there and contemplate, like, the doctors can explain to you medically what happened and how it happened, but it doesn't change the fact that it happened. And it's like, but I'm a good person. He's a good person. How did this happen to him? Why did this happen to him? Why did it have to be his son? I don't understand. Like, what happened? Why me? Why my son? You didn't get to experience anything. Well, I only got 3 years. He only got 3 years with him. When I think about that, when I'm like, we've all had questions. We all ask these questions. We are not Christians because we're no longer Christians. We can't sit there and no longer call us Christians because we have questions, regardless of how worldly these questions sound, right? Because so many people think when you become a Christian, you become immune to life problems, to life issues. And it's like, no.
It's the opposite. Jesus promises persecution.
Yes.
Like, it's the total opposite. And the Bible says that the Spirit of God and the flesh, or the world, are at enmity with each other. So it's like, the moment you're a Christian, like, you used to be a friend of the world, and the world, nobody made fun of you for being a Christian before you're a Christian. Nobody made fun of your thoughts or anything. And then all of a sudden you're a Christian, and there's this difference, and something's happening. I mean, if I were to become a Buddhist tomorrow, I'm not going to have anybody harass me about my new religion. No way. Yep. They would be very respectful of that.
Yes.
But the moment you convert to Christianity, all of a sudden that's an issue. Because what is it about Christianity? Out of all religions, that's the one people have an issue with,
Yep.
And why? Like, it's not like it has any weird beliefs morality wise. Like, you're taught to love your neighbor as yourself. You're taught to love your enemies. Like, all of it's good in the most classic sense of it. And it's just crazy to me that that's the religion that people have issues with. But then it starts to make sense, because if I was talking about this the other day on my podcast with a guy, because now that I'm living in Thailand, I see all these Buddhist monks and then the temples that are they're absolutely beautiful, amazing. And then I go in and I see these statues and the Westerners that rock up to see these temples and statues of golden Buddhas and things like that, it takes them about 3-4 seconds to walk into the temple and then get on their knees and start praying. And I'm like, they're not even a Buddhist. They're just there. And it's like, I think what happened is that when Satan was jealous of God, he wanted to be like God.
Yes.
God is obviously the creator of all things. He's the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and is by design supposed to be worshipped because he is the creator of all things. So how do you be like God would be to take on the ability to be worshipped. Now, Satan wanted God to worship him, and that way he would be superior. But obviously God's not going to do that. So he convinces the image bearers, the ones that are in the same image and likeness as God, if I can get that to worship me, then I will be like God. So I believe that these religions like Buddhism and Sikh and all these different religions that have these statues, and basically I've got this one outside my house. It's not mine, for your listeners. Just one that is there. It basically looks like a demon. Like, it's totally black with red fangs and has these bat wings coming out of it. Like, it's crazy that this is a Buddhist statue. And I'm like, I couldn't think of something more demonic in my nightmares. And people are worshipping this. And I'm thinking, is just wanting our worship. So the moment that we go towards Christianity, he now doesn't have it. He has our worship with Buddhism. He has our worship with Sikh. He has our worship with Hinduism. He has our worship with all these other ones because he takes on the form of these different religions. But he does not have our worship with Christianity. And then all of a sudden, when you worship God, actual Jesus, then the world goes nuts and goes, You shouldn't do that. You're an evil person for being a Christian. You're judgmental. You're, all of this sort of stuff. It just, they lose their mind. They flip out. And I'm like, man, if the whole world reacts that negatively to me being a Christian, and then Jesus goes, this is going to happen. You're going to be persecuted for doing this. It's like, all right, well, I think I'm doing the right thing then. Like, but the good thing is God equips us. He's like, you're going to be persecuted. And when it happens, have joy because your faith is being tested. And it's like, and then that's going to create maturity, and that's going to create this resilience to following Christ. And when he says to pick up my cross and follow me, that's not an easy thing to do. He's saying in a worst case scenario, and you have to go to the cross like I did, you will.
Yes.
Like that's how much you need to follow me. And it's, all right, well, baby steps. Let's build this resistance. Let's build the ability to be able to withstand this persecution, but expect it. And when it comes, do it with joy. And I mean, that's just, I don't even know how I got onto this topic, but that is something I've noticed here in Thailand. Well, man, my mind goes to crazy places.
No, well, you know what? I can your perspective. It's all very interesting, your perspective on this. And living in Thailand, living in a different country, especially for those listeners who are in these states, right, where you have this perspective where you're like, hey, like this is what the common, like, again, if the states are a Christian or based on Christian morals, right? But then you go to other countries, again, where they predominantly worship, they're like India, where you got Hindu, Buddhism, right? All these things. And you're just like, this is what they believe, this is what they worship. But then you're like, but like, that's like,
it's pretty demonic when you're thinking about.
You're like, that's like, guys, like when we make a movie for Satan, that's the picture we get. Like, how did you get, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Okay.
And particularly Buddhism, the one thing they're trying to do is achieve nirvana, which is the emptying of yourself and your value so that you are nothing. Jesus says you are valuable.
Yes.
I paid such a high price for you that the King of Kings, the creator that can magically make value happen like gold and silver, he can make that appear out of nothing. that still wasn't enough to pay for you. I had to pay for you by using a product outside of the universe. I had to pay with Jesus's blood, something that's not even in the universe. I had to pull something out of this universe that was made the universe and use that as payment for you. That's how much you're valued. Like, you think that God can just pay for you by doing an exchange of all the planets in the solar system and all the, like, trade heaven and earth for you. You're still worth more than that. How crazy is that? You know? And that nirvana, the idea of this Buddhism, is the total opposite, saying you're worth nothing, become nothing, achieve nothing, do nothing, your value is nothing, and then you achieve nirvana. And I'm like, that's extraordinarily demonic when you start thinking of it in comparison to how God values us. And it's like, no wonder you're depressed over here.
You're like, hey, I've solved your problem. You don't need a psychologist, but I don't know if you'll like my answer.
Yeah, basically.
You know, y'all, look, this is phenomenal. Look, we are, Joel, we're going to have to do this again. We are absolutely going to have to do this again, because I love talking to you. And I think conversations, we've gone so many different places, right? And I think it's
if
been
you need
a blast.
to finish, I could just keep going. So anytime, I'm happy to come back. But yeah, totally understand. We should probably finish up.
Yeah, look, y'all, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up, right? And I'll say this, right? Understand, guys, we started this conversation, we were talking about Instagram, right? Understand Instagram. We started talking about Instagram. That's when I press record. We were talking about Instagram, guys, and we're going to get into this. And now we ended up on Hinduism. And we've talked about aliens. We've talked about, everything. Okay.
Necromancy, zombies.
Literally. So, like, understand, right? Like, this is truthfully one of the reasons why I love doing podcasts, why I love doing this, and why I think it's so much fun is because conversations go anywhere. And you talk to people and you're like, okay, you know this, you've heard about this, you talk about this, and you think you're interested in this. The conversation goes in where you're just like, okay, I heard this thing. Where I thought it was phenomenal. We brought up Matthew 52, 27, 52, right? Phenomenal. Where you're like, hey, tell me what you think, right? That is where children, like, these conversations go anywhere, and this is how powerful these conversations are. I want y'all to get value out of these things. I do believe you get value out of these conversations. They're fun. Joel's information will be in the description below. You'll be able to follow him on Instagram and Facebook. It's the Jesus Magnet as well on Facebook.
Yeah, I can send you that. Yep.
Okay, sweet. And so it's on Facebook. Guys, be looking out for this episode. Today's the 12th. It's technically Wednesday. It is Wednesday. Joel, we'll talk offline, but be looking out for this episode really soon. Might be tomorrow. Anyway, that being said, we're going to get out of here, guys. It's been a great time talking to you, Joel. I really appreciate you coming on. It means a lot to me. It means a lot to the viewers. His stuff will be in the description, guys. I do got to get out of here because I get to go to bed. But hey, as of course, it feels weird saying because we didn't really talk about dads, but it doesn't matter. Being mediocre is a choice. You have to refuse to be mediocre every single day. That's all I got, guys. Mediocre Dads out.